Hey everyone, I am back with my work wife, Dr. Sara Gottfried, who is the co-host of the Health Bridge podcast and a dear friend of mine and really a mover and shaker in our universe, MIT bioengineer, Harvard medical doctor, the expert to the experts for hormones and anything that happens, kind of like she's the endocrine superstar and a dear friend. So welcome, Sara.
Thanks, Pedram. Hi, everybody.
Hi. So you and I have talked about this a lot on our show, and everyone's watched this movie now, and they're looking at what we're talking about in the summit in terms of like, okay, now what do I do, right? How can I get involved in this on a personal level? Because yeah, it sounds like, you know, poisoning yourself sucks, right? And so I'd love to get into that conversation with you and kind of follow the breadcrumbs into what it does to the hormonal system and all the systems in that way, because endocrine disruptors are real. And you and I, again, if you guys haven't listened to the Health Bridge, we highly recommend it, but we're going to kick down some knowledge here on all of that because it's really relevant where environment meets your health.
Well, I love talking about this with you, Pedram, because you've got the best analogies of anyone out there. I mean, way better than me. So let's rock a few analogies. I think one of them that we should talk about in terms of the specifics of how you can get practical is the way that your liver is assaulted by these endocrine disruptors. They come into your system in a few different ways. You can either ingest them, you know, maybe you eat a can of beans and there's some bisphenol A lining that can, or maybe you take receipts when you check out at 40% of the retail outlets in the US, and those receipts are lined with bisphenol A. Bisphenol A is an endocrine disruptor of all types. It disrupts the estrogen receptor, the thyroid receptor, and also the androgen receptor for testosterone and DHEA. So it really causes a lot of problems in the body. But first and foremost, I think of it as causing estrogen pollution for both guys and also women. What does that look like? Well, it looks like man boobs. It can cause problems with fatty liver, which we can get into. So there's a few things that you want to be thinking about. One is, and I just talked about ingesting it and also getting it through your skin, like with receipts. So one of the things you want to do is to really lev up your liver. So maybe we could riff a bit on ways to lev up your liver. And you and I both are going through this gong where we have been diagnosed with fatty liver.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah, it's not like either of us are hitting the bottle either, right? It's, you know, we both have problems with our detoxification and are challenged. I mean, here we are, two doctors trying to do the right thing, and the world out there is challenging. I mean, you walk into an elevator with someone who's wearing perfume and you're sensitive to chemicals, boom. You might be down, whether you're down on your back or just not yourself for 3 days. Right, and so this is a real deal thing, and you know the two-pronged approach of the movie obviously is, hey, stop polluting and stop supporting the people who pollute so that we can have a cleaner world, but at the same time build up your rhizosphere, build up the microbiome, build up your body's capacity to offset this, because you know, I think there's, you know, if we make a proclamation right now, all the diesel trucks on the road aren't going to just stop running tomorrow.
Are you sure about that, Pedram? I thought we were pretty powerful.
I know we've got influence, but
aren't they just going to stop all those receipts? You know, the Environmental Working Group said 40% of the receipts across the U.S. that they tested were positive for bisphenol A. Aren't they just going to stop because we asked them to?
Yeah, because it's the right thing to do. No,
Yeah.
It's so inconvenient, and that's the problem. So what do we do, being that we live in an industry that you know, kind of lives on externalities, right? Like, oh well, you know, we don't care about that. The receipts are cheaper, and then here you are getting bisphenol A dropping into your system. I mean, let's quickly do a play-by-play. Like, you know, I could listen to this and be like, well, what's the big deal, right? So what is the big deal as bisphenol A hits the fingertips? And let's kind of trace all the places that can go and talk about how yucky that is and why we got to be so vigilant. And, you know, and I don't know if the answer is wearing gloves, right?
Well, one answer is when they ask you if you want the receipt in the bag, you say yes, you don't touch that thing. Or better yet, don't even get the receipt. But I like this idea of kind of tracing what happens when you get exposed to an endocrine disruptor. So maybe we could do a little Mars and Venus thing, as we love to do as work husband and wife. So one of the things that happens with bisphenol A is that it comes into your body, either you eat it or it comes through your skin, and it binds to the estrogen receptor. And, you know, for some people, they're thinking, oh, geez, she's going to start talking biochemistry. But here's the idea. Your hormone receptors in your body for estrogen and for all other types of hormones are promiscuous, especially the estrogen receptor. So it binds to estrogen. It also binds to bisphenol A. It binds to phthalates and many other endocrine disruptors. So the bisphenol A will bind to the estrogen receptor and it won't let go. Like they're supposed to have kind of quick sex and then they let go, right? Like hormone, receptor, they have sex, done. But bisphenol A actually binds to the receptor and hangs on. So you get this constant stimulation of the estrogen receptor and your body just keeps, going down these estrogen pathways. That's what leads to the man boobs. And also for women, they get more estrogen deposits at their hips and also at their buttocks. Guys can get that too. So that's one of the paths, is that you have too much estrogen. You have estrogen dominance.
Well, and looking at that in terms of how the body works, right? I mean, the body loves homeostasis. The body loves balance, right? And then all of a sudden, you're getting a signal that won't shut off. And it's throwing things off that are making entire systems start spinning and running around, wondering why the hell there's a fire going on somewhere. And we don't really know. We think, I don't know, maybe I drank too much coffee. You know, I was kind of pissed off because traffic was too bad. You know, we start doing this psychological analysis of why maybe we don't feel well, or maybe I didn't sleep well last night, because society is just, there's arrows flying at us, from all directions. So it's hard for us to put our finger on it, no pun intended, and say, oh, well, that was the bisphenol A that came in and jacked my estrogen receptors from a week ago, right? But this is how it happens. And then all of a sudden you got a culture filled with people who just don't feel well and they can't figure out why. And their doctors can't figure out why half the time.
That's right. And, another kind of path that we can trace is the effect on fertility, which I think is such an important one. And I love that you feature it prominently in your book. We have an epidemic of infertility in our country. It's not just a problem with women waiting longer to have children, which I certainly did, and you did. We waited until a little later to have kids, but that's not the reason for the infertility epidemic. What I think is a key reason is our exposure to endocrine disruptors. So if you look at, what's the number one reason for infertility among women in the US right now, it's a problem called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And there's many different hormones that are affected with PCOS, but ultimately the main problem is that you've got too much insulin and also too much testosterone or androgens. Now we know that women with PCO have higher exposures to bisphenol A. This has been documented really clearly. We also know from a study that was published from Harvard, this was in abstract form last year, they showed that phthalate exposure, another xenoestrogen or estrogenic endocrine disruptor, women who have the highest levels of phthalates in their blood have the worst egg quality. They have a poor outcome when they have infertility and go through in vitro fertilization. They also have more miscarriages. So these endocrine disruptors are definitely affecting fertility as well.
So here's a line that I often use kind of flippantly from the movie that wasn't quite said this way in the movie, but the summation is, what kind of dumb animal forgets how to survive in the very environment it evolved in? And so when we start looking at this rise in infertility being caused by our actions and looking at the potential extinction of our species, or at least a serious readjust, it's got to be a wake-up call, because we're not talking about estrogens, we're talking about xenoestrogens. I'd love for you to kind of talk about what that means, because it's not the stuff your body endogenously produces, and it's like a super estrogen, right?
It is. Well, I want to be careful about using super. It's a bad estrogen.
Sure.
So, when I talk about estrogens in my book, I like to group them into two different categories. There's the the good estrogens, the ones like estradiol and estriol. Estriol is what women make in pregnancy. Those are protective. So they're safe, they're meant to be happening in your body. Then there's the not so good estrogens, and that would include the metabolized estrogens that can actually cause harm in your body. And there's a lot of different ones that you will make, and then there's also the fake estrogens that you get exposed to from the environment. So what I feel like you're asking about is what has been called the exposome. And I think that might be a helpful term to bring in here, the exposome. So the idea with the exposome is that probably 90% of the chronic disease that we're facing right now as a culture is due to the exposome. What is it? Well, it's the external chemicals that we're exposed to, the ionizing radiation, the pollution, the endocrine disruptors, plus many other things, heavy metals. And then it's also what we're making inside of our bodies that's not good for us. So this includes, some of the foul play that's happening in our gut from the microbiome, lipopolysaccharides, as well as the toxic metabolites from things that we ingest or get exposed to through our skin. So I think exposome is a good concept here. And then I would say it's the fake estrogens and also the not so good estrogen metabolites that are the problem.
Yeah, and if you go back 100,000 years or even 10,000 years, I mean, this wasn't even on the radar, right? Because we're not using petroleum-based products that are getting into everything. We're not exposing ourselves to anything that's really outside of this thing called nature. And all of a sudden, we start going buck wild, and this entire better living through chemistry type of thinking really took off. And we're at a place now where it's just so ridiculously out of control that, it's like a bunch of drunk frat boys in a lab saying, hey, what about this? Oh, that's cool. And then they just put it in the food, or they just put it in stuff. And there's not enough regulation. There's not enough evidence to suggest that this won't harm pathways down the line. And so here we are 30 years later in this grand chemical experiment, wondering why everyone's sick, everyone has chronic fatigue, and we're being rendered infertile.
Yeah, you totally got it. I mean, you've nailed it. And I like that analogy of the drunk frat boys. We seem to come back to that particular analogy a lot.
We've met those guys.
And maybe we've even been to those parties. Yeah. So, I read this Mother Jones article recently that I thought was really good, where it said that big chemistry is the big tobacco of the 21st century. And I think that's such an important concept. You're absolutely right that it is like a group of drunk frat boys coming up with ideas about, okay, there's all this data now that bisphenol A is bad. So let's do the BPA-free water container. Let's do the BPA-free plastic lining on the canned goods. And guess what? The BPA-free chemical, also assumed innocent until proven guilty, is just as bad for you. So this is, I think, another important point of your film, Origins, Pedram, which is that you want to really vote with your dollars and to not turn your power over to the chemical industry and instead say, okay, how am I going to reduce exposure? And then once I've got this stuff in my body, how do I make my body as safe as possible? How do I reduce body burden?
It's really tough. Okay, so you and I talk about this a lot. You're a mom. You got two lovely daughters. I got a baby, downstairs, and it's so hard to even understand where you're at with this, because I have BPA-free bottles, right? But how the hell do I know if 5 years from now we don't all of a sudden see that these BPA-free bottles have caused X type of defect in this child? And it's like, so I'm running around, runningwell.org, making movies, doing all this stuff, fighting on multiple fronts, trying to make the world a better place. But the enemy might already be in my house, and my baby might be suckling on this thing. And it's so nerve-wracking living in a world where you have to not trust things. And so we need to find a way, and I'd love to discuss this with you, for us to have a better way of interacting with household products where we just feel safe.
Yes, I feel like anytime we start talking about endocrine disruptors, everyone starts to feel vaguely unwell. Just like, oh geez, I got the BPA-free baby bottles. Are those okay? Well, one of the ways to deal with this is to go with the tried and true. Like, we know that glass containers and stainless steel containers are safe. We also know if you're cooking with pans that aren't lined in Teflon or plastic, that's safe. You never want to cook stuff in the microwave, especially not in a plastic container. So I think we want to use some of those really key principles. I think we talk about them in your movie. And then we also, just want to acknowledge that, okay, we are all vaguely unwell. Like, we're all exposed to these things. Given that fact, what do we do about it? Like, what's going to help you with the liver? There was a study that was done recently. This is another abstract from Texas that I thought was interesting, where they looked at the diagnosis of fatty liver, or more accurately, non-alcoholic fatty liver, among a survey of the population in Texas. And they found that 50% of the people that they tested had non-alcoholic fatty liver. And I believe much of this is related to our exposure to endocrine disruptors. If you look kind of across the US, it's somewhere around 30%. So this is definitely affecting a lot of our listeners. And I feel like it's flying below the radar. So we want to just assume, if maybe your liver's perfect, but there's a good chance that you are like Pedram and me, and you're trying to reverse alcoholic or non-alcoholic fatty liver. So maybe we should talk about some of the ways that you can do that.
Yeah, that's great. And for those of you who are listeners of the Health Bridge, we actually went to a dear friend of ours, Dr. Alan Christensen, who ran blood on us and really kind of put us through a protocol. And here we are, two doctors who kind of know, right, or do know, but are too busy to, fight off all the sushi and all the, exposure that we were exposed to. And it was like, holy crap, me? Mercury? Me? Lead? Right? Like, I've been so careful. And so I want to make a quick point to this, because I have always kind of felt fine, right? I'm a Qigong guy. I've been doing my thing. I mean, you're a yoga instructor as well. I mean, we have our personal practice, which gets us to have a little degree of cushion, right? Like our vitality. And so I didn't really even notice any of this until we had a baby, and all of a sudden I'm not sleeping. And then all of a sudden that kryptonite hits me, and I'm just like, man, there's something wrong. We go do all this blood work. It's like, oh, wow. Look at that toxic dump. And I'm being a little, hyperbolic here, because the numbers were a little higher than I'd like to see, right? But I didn't realize it until a life event drove me to realize it. And this is what happens a lot of times. You're listening to this saying, well, I feel fine. Of course you do. Until you have a business problem, until you have a divorce, until you have that one flu that hits you and you never really got back up. So it's not a matter of saying, well, I feel fine, therefore I'm okay, so these guys, are crazy. It's saying, look, this is going on in an undercurrent, and you will have a certain, to me, it's a testament to how amazing life is and how resilient life is, really, that we're all exposed to so much crap and still are able to walk around all day and not crash our cars into each other. Right? And so I kind of want to say that going into this, because yeah, you might feel fine, but it doesn't mean it's right. And
it's true. And even what we're diagnosing as fatty liver, that definition has changed. And I only learned about this in the past couple of years. Like, it's only been the past 2 to 3 years that the top hepatologists have taken a standard test that people get when they go see their doctor, called the Comprehensive Metabolic Panel. And they've taken one set of liver enzymes called the ALT, and they've said, okay, for the women, you need to have an ALT less than 20. And for the guys, you need to have an ALT less than 30. Otherwise, you have non-alcoholic fatty liver until proven otherwise. Now, you may also have an issue with alcohol, and you need to give that up and recheck your liver enzymes. But, I totally agree with you that for so many people, they feel fine until they have that straw that broke the camel's back. For you had that beautiful baby, you started sleeping less, and I think you, at one point, if you allow me to say this, you said, I've turned into an aromatizing bitch. I've got to fix this. Do you want to explain yourself?
Yeah, totally. So what happens is when your system's off and your body is no longer capable of doing what it's supposed to be doing, there's a couple pathways you could go down. But for me, like, I break down testosterone and start shunting over to estrogen and becoming more estrogenic. So all of a sudden I'm putting on mid-belly, like mid-weight, like kind of gut fat. And I'm like, this isn't me. right? And all of a sudden, all these things start happening that are not me, right? And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, I'm in my late 30s, I'm not sleeping, but this isn't the right pathway, right? I'm heading in the wrong direction. So when you see this stuff happening, you can either wait another 10 years and go on hormone replacement at your doctor's, or go, wait a minute, my body shouldn't be doing this, and what is going on? And this is really where functional medicine steps in and really shifts the way we're looking at all of this, because there is a silent revolution going on, and it's not so silent anymore. I mean, Mark Hyman's in the movie. A lot of the doctors in the movie are functional medicine doctors, and this is the new way of looking at medicine. Is like, hey, look, you have all this toxic exposure, and it's going to be a problem. Why don't we deal with this now so that you don't end up having cancer or ALS or, you know, Lord knows what 5, 10, 20 years from now.
That's right. Beautifully put. So functional medicine, you know, I think about it as upstream medicine, that you're really looking at root causes. You're doing those course corrections that you're talking about that I think are so important. So what are some of those course corrections? You know, one that I think is really crucial is that you love up your liver in very specific ways. One way to do it is to take a supplement called N-acetylcysteine. And I love N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, because it's probably one of the safest supplements out there. It's got just a crazy good safety profile. It's been shown to help with pretty much every single phase of liver detoxification. It also has been shown in animals to reduce lead and mercury toxicity, which you and I, you know, we're both kind of glowing on the screen right now as we detox from lead and mercury. So I really love N-acetylcysteine. It's on my A list of supplements.
Fantastic. I don't know if everyone listening here understands how busy the liver is, right? The liver is really, really a remarkable organ, and it is constantly working for us. I mean, from the conjugation of hormones to the clearance of chemicals and the Tylenol that you took. I mean, it is constantly through phase 1 and phase 2, and I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit more on this. Going through and cleaning out it's like the oil filter of the body in a way, and it's really susceptible to getting overworked. And so if we could love up our liver, like Dr. Sara's talking about, we really hedge our bet. Because the liver is, and it's also one of the most regenerative organs, if not the most regenerative organ we have. So it's just amazing. I'd love for you to just dive into that a little.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, I love the liver. I have to say, when I first studied it in anatomy back in 1989, I was totally grossed out. And this idea of regeneration, I was just like, ew, I don't want to grow more liver. But the liver is just one of these behind the scenes organs that does so much for you. It basically is filtering your blood of impurities. It's taking that BPA and endocrine disruptors that you ingest and removing it, sending it off to the fat. So what does it do? I like to think of an analogy I heard from Holly Lucille when I talk about this. She's a naturopathic doctor that I love. And she describes phase 1 of the liver detoxification as being kind of like you're collecting the garbage in your apartment in New York. So you collect the garbage and you take it out to the curb. So that's what we're doing. We're kind of we're taking these toxins that we get exposed to, and also some hormones, and we're taking the byproducts that your body can't use, and whatever we can, we're gonna try to remove it. We're gonna take it to the curb. Phase 2 is when you're trying to get rid of those toxins more specifically. And so it's through conjugation, and there's all these different biochemical processes. It's kind of like the garbage collectors in New York coming and taking those bags of garbage. Now, what happens in the body once you get overtaxed, which may have happened with you and me, Pedram, is that the garbage collectors are on strike. So you're collecting more and more garbage in your apartment. The bags are piling up at the curb, and there's no garbage collectors coming. So it starts to smell bad. Maybe you have bad breath and you can't poop, and you're having issues with your gut. You can't tolerate food the way that you used to be able to. You get exposed to something kind of minor, like the perfumer you were talking about, and you're just maxed out. You can't deal with it. You've got chemical sensitivity. Yeah. So this is really common, you know, kind of the garbage collectors going on strike, the phase 2 detox pathway being underperforming, and phase 1 kind of making too much garbage.
Love that. So Lucille, nice metaphors. So yeah, and if you think about it, if you got a bunch of garbage sitting on the street, then cars are having to drive around, people can't walk on that curb. Think of all of the other systems that fall apart when the garbage hasn't been moved out. It's like it's a showstopper, right? If that happened at a restaurant, you wouldn't eat there, right? And so then things start to adapt, and you know, the body does everything it can with its checks and balances to move around things. But there are certain things, and you talked about this in the movie, and I want to kind of elaborate a little bit here. There are certain things that the body is just incapable of conjugating and detoxing out, and it ends up saying, well, I don't know what the hell to do with this, so let's store it in the fat cells. And I'd love to elaborate, because I mean, that weight loss yo-yo that we're seeing because of this kind of ineffective detox pathway is enormous. And you know, you and I talk about this offline a lot. We've talked about it on the radio show a lot, and I think it's a huge piece to what's happening here.
It is a huge piece. So, you know, the body is just not accustomed to, I think we've been exposed to now something like 70,000 new chemicals since World War II. So, you know, our body evolved a long time ago, as you talk about so beautifully in Origins, and we're just not designed to deal with these 70,000 chemicals. So when your liver is confused about what to do, like, do I send this to the curb? What the hell do I do with this stuff? I don't know what it is. It'll just wall it off in the fat. We kind of talked about that as being prison inside the body, if you remember that analogy that you came up with, Pedram. And, you know, here's the great irony. This is like a chapter from the book, Life is Unfair. When you start to lose weight, like right now I'm teaching a detox where I've got all of these detoxers, about 90% are burning fat and losing fat for good. And then I have about 10% who lost some weight and then they hit a plateau. And they have, you know, maybe that yo-yo weight loss that you're talking about, where maybe you lose 10 pounds and then you hit a wall, or you lose 10 pounds and then you gain 7 back. And it's often because you are burning fat, which is where you stuck all those prisoners, you know, the endocrine disruptors the body didn't know what to do with. And the irony is that you may start off a detox or start off with, you know, a certain weight and a certain blood level of these endocrine disruptors. And then as you burn fat, your blood level of these endocrine disruptors goes up because you're burning the fat that contains those endocrine disruptors. So this is really unfortunate. And, you know, what it means is that you want to dig in and detoxify, get rid of those endocrine disruptors, reduce your body burden.
I was talking to Alan Christensen this past weekend, actually. I was out there, and he was showing me some data about how even chimpanzees with controlled diets are gaining weight right now. And so, you know, all of this calorie counting and, like, you know, trying to, you know, be careful about what we eat and how we eat it is still not working. And so if you start looking at the other math, it's like, well, what about the particularized, you know, the particles of diesel fume that just went in through my lungs that the body doesn't know what to do with? And so no one wants to look at this because there's a $1 trillion industry on the oil side and a $1 trillion industry on big food going, hey, look away. Look away. You're fat because you don't exercise enough, right? You're fat because you don't take the right weight loss pills. And so it's become it's the elephant in the room, and it's a big, big deal. And we're finding out more and more that our systems are just not capable of doing what they are you know, evolved to do, because we're throwing chemicals at them that they can't handle. And I want to be clear about this. If I have a little bit of mold, or if I have some bacteria my body doesn't like, or maybe, you know, particles of dust or something, the body goes, oh, okay, yeah, get this thing, move it out. But if I have bisphenol A or, you know, propylene glycol, it's not in the encyclopedia of nature as registered by this consciousness here. So it goes, I don't know what the hell this is, right? And so then it does what Dr. Sara's talking about.
Yeah, this is such a good point. And maybe I'll say it in another way that I think is important to enunciate. When you look at the last 50 years and you look at how the obesity rate has tripled in the United States, if you look at what's happened with how much we eat and also how much we exercise, that doesn't explain the tripling of the obesity rate in the past 50 years. There's a gap between how fat we are and what we're doing with food and exercise. That gap is thought to be related to a couple of things. Number one are exposures to endocrine disruptors, and in this case, we would call them obesogens, a specific type of endocrine disruptors that make you fat and toxic. Mm-hmm. The other issue is our stress wiring, which you and I talk about all the time, and how so many of us are in this survival mode, which tends to put us into a famine mode, where our body just hangs on to fat no matter what, no matter what. And the survival wiring, I think, is such an important piece to talk about as well. It's also the topic of Alan's next book, The Adrenal Reset Diet.
Yeah, let's jump into that, because, you know, one of the major through lines on this movie is, you know, we got really good at survival, and now survival's back, right? And it's back full force, because, oh my goodness, the bills are coming in. Oh my goodness, the terrorists are doing these things, and you know, there's Ebola in Dallas, and so, like, it's we're in a world where we're just kind of collapsing on this mode of panic, and that puts our bodies in this other place. And I'd love for you to talk about the science of survival and what it does to cortisol and the rest of it.
Sure. Well, you know, I think this is the classic story of the alarm system in the body and our stress response system. I think it was designed, you know, I'm thinking right now of the beginning of Origins, where you're walking around with Dr. Michael Yang in Africa. And, you know, we were designed to encounter a lion maybe once a quarter. Like every 3 months, our system would get freaked out. We would suddenly raise our cortisol level. That would raise our blood pressure so we could run or fight, and it would also raise our blood sugar so that we had the energy for our muscles to be able to run or fight. So that's the fight and flight wiring that we have. The problem is it gets activated almost on a daily basis for so many of us, unless you're an urban monk or you have some other methods to be able to dance with stress in a different way. So what is going on now is that, you know, I remember you and I were doing a podcast, and while we were talking, my daughter was texting me that I needed to go drop off her lunch because she forgot it. And I have to consciously work to not get stressed out, because I had no time. I had no one who could go deliver her lunch. She's hungry at school, and I had these other commitments. And so I was supposed to be in 2 places at once, which I think comes up for so many people. And that's why their stress system gets activated. But we have to find ways to consciously cool that system down and to create a balance between the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, so that we can have like this smooth back and forth between those 2 states.
Let's jump into this, because you and I talk about this a lot. We're both really busy people. I mean, you're a New York Times best-selling author. You're out there, you know, book deals and all kinds of crazy stuff. You're famous, and you're, you know, deservedly famous, but it keeps you incredibly busy, right? You know, I'm running well.org, I'm making movies and all this kind of stuff, and it's work, right? And so a big kind of recurring theme between the two of us is establishing work-life balance, right? You and I both know better than most what happens when that doesn't work, right? And so I'd love for you to talk to what you're doing to establish better work-life balance as a super busy person, right? It's easy for, you know, some yoga monk person who lives up on a hill who does nothing but, you know, pick, you know, berries and meditate all day to say, I'm not stressed out, right? How does Sara Gottfried do it?
Yeah, it's definitely changed over time. And I did have a moment in my life where I was picking berries. That was before children, right? That was before medical school. I was in Alaska in the bush, and I was working for the Department of Fish and Game. I was counting salmon with sonar, and I was picking blueberries on the tundra. Oh. And I have to say, like, my body never was better. I was super lean. I was having wild Alaskan salmon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Totally different story. So I appreciate where this question is coming from. Well, you and I talk a lot about this, about ritualizing our day, so that it's not just waking up in the morning like, oh God, where's my coffee? And instead getting very intentional and aware of what it is you want. And you and I have talked before about this idea that I love from one of my yoga teachers, Anna Forrest, about architecting your day, kind of like you would architect as a yoga teacher a yoga class, where you set your intention at the beginning. You and I both start with our own form of meditation. And then you have sort of your apex pose at some point during the day. And then you crescendo to that point, and then you start to decrescendo and get ready for bed and kind of prepare all along with a lot of awareness and mindfulness. So that's one thing, is this ritualization, getting up in the morning. You know, it's not always my first thought, but I try to channel Wayne Dyer. You and I talked about this movie before, The Shift, where he gets up in the morning, puts his feet on the floor, and he says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." That's not always my first thought, but it's my second thought, to be grateful.
After you realize the first one's going to get you in trouble, which is
totally.
Oh my God, I can't believe that alarm went off.
Yeah, let me reel that first thought in. So I do about 30 minutes of meditation. Sometimes it's sitting, sometimes it's with heart math, which is, you know, one way to improve your heart rate variability, a measure of stress resilience. Sometimes it's a yin yoga pose. Sometimes during my gong, it's qigong. That's what I do. Now you have a morning ritual too.
Yeah, I get up and do qigong. I walk the dogs with the wife and the baby, and don't answer the phone unless it's an emergency. And there's seldom emergencies that require me over an ambulance, right? And take that time in the morning. I'll start doing my push-ups and start just getting my body ready for the day. And one of my big things, and this is something I just went over with a friend, was you have to architect your day so that your first activity in the morning is the big chunk stuff that you've been meaning to get done today. Because most people will just like get pushed around all day like driftwood on a beach, just tumbling around in the waves, and then come like 4:30, go, oh my God, I gotta finish all this, and now I can't finish, I gotta go home, and then when the kids go to bed, I gotta do some more work. And they kind of goofed off in a real kind of subtle way and didn't handle their day like a master. And so then the stress is there because their time management, their event management, and their energy management was off. And those are just kind of like basic precepts to a life well lived, right? So on one end, we're talking about holding up your shield and kind of pushing back on the bisphenol A and all this other kind of stuff. And on the other hand, it's like, you could do all that, but then say yes to Facebook instead of yes to your day, and lose 2 hours of just nonsense, you know, wasted time. And you know, what a way to accumulate stress and also feel like you didn't get anything done.
Oh, it's so true. I love that exercise where you take a piece of paper and you put yes on one side and no on the other, because every time you're saying yes to email or to Facebook, you're saying no to yourself. You're saying no to this intentionality that we're talking about. Another really important part, I think, of work-life balance, and let me just say for everybody, I'm not talking about some seesaw that's like perfectly horizontal. I'm talking about work-life balance where there's always a bit of change and you're just trying not to slam that seesaw into the ground. That's like my definition of balance. So it's a process, it's not a destination. And I think food, like the way you're intentional and aware about food and your reactions to it, is a really important part of that work-life balance. I find, for instance, that when I start my day with a shake, when I make a yummy chocolate smoothie with some greens in there and some fiber, it's making all the good bacteria in my gut happy, it's balancing my blood sugar, it's helping me, because of the fiber, get rid of my body burden, reduce my toxic load. And it just helps me be more connected to my children and my husband. It allows me to really work, on meaningful things so that I'm not off on Facebook for an hour and I'm not, checking email all day long. I can make these chocolate smoothie decisions all day long. That's a Kevin Gianni. He talks about making green smoothie decisions all day long, and I really love that, so I want to give him credit for that one.
Awesome. And for those of you who don't know Kevin Gianni, you should. Renegade Health, and he and his wife created a non-toxic cosmetic line because they just couldn't find one that they liked that didn't poison them. And so you'll see them actually in Green Friday. They're good friends, and they're doing the right thing. And here's a point I'd like to kind of start closing out on here, is doing the right thing, right? It's really easy to do the wrong thing, because if you turn on your TV or you listen to the radio, they're telling you to do things and drumming you into a place where you're going to react and purchase something that you probably don't need. right? Or you do need, but you don't need the one that they made, right? And so how do you stop and become more intentional about the things that come into your house? You and I talked about this. You and I had a really long series of conversations about endocrine disruptors and sofas and what kind of chemicals come off of the fire retardants that are legislated into being on sofas, at least in California. And so I had to go make an organic custom-made sofa for my new house because I got a baby arriving in it, right? And so that was intentional, and it took a little bit more work. It really didn't cost more than the same size sofa out there, but it was kind of a pain in the ass. But you know, I don't have something that emits cancer in my living room.
Yeah, I love this one. You basically don't want things in your house that smell like cancer. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. You know, I learned a lot from my husband when I first got married. We're just coming up on our wedding anniversary. So I have to bring in my husband, David Gottfried. He founded the U.S. Green Building Council, and he's just a total rock star who really walks the talk, eats the talk, breathes the talk. And so one of the things he made me do is to start taking off our shoes when you come in our front door. Pedram, we made you do this when you came to visit recently. And the issue here is that we walk around, we get all this petroleum gunk and other types of endocrine disruptors on the bottom of our shoes, and then you're trailing that all over the house. So one of the first things you can do is take off your shoes, leave them at the door, make your guests do that too. Another key thing, you mentioned skincare products. You know, the average woman gets 515 synthetic chemicals on her skin every day. And I just think that's a travesty. So you want to start looking at your labels. You know, I just tested high for lead, probably because of all the years I had of wearing glamorous lipstick that was full of lead. The average woman gets about 10 pounds of lead just from her lipstick exposure over her lifetime. So you want to start using the organic lipstick, or, you know, like Kevin Gianni, Anne-Marie Gianni, Beyond Organic. So another key point is some of the cleaning products that you have in your home. You know, some of the brands that we grew up with are not the best thing. And there's lots of ways to inexpensively make cleaning products just from baking soda and you know, different things that you have around the home. You can also, you know, I use Method, I use a lot of different products that are organic in the home, soaps, also shampoos and conditioners. So I think you really want to think about, how do I get exposed to these endocrine disruptors in the home? And then how do I block them at the door? Don't let cancer into the house. And with the stuff we do get exposed to, like our shoes and cleaning products, skincare products, how do I replace those over time? You don't have to do a wholesale change all at once, but you can gradually change. Maybe for the holidays this year, you ask for organic shampoo and conditioner, or you ask for a really awesome organic lipstick from your friends that has some stain power. So those are the kind of shifts we want to be making. I
love that. And so, and a point that you made that I think really needs to be accentuated is people are like, oh my God, that's going to cost me a fortune. I can't afford it. It's like, well, actually you can if you do it sequentially, because next time you run out of lipstick, then you go buy the better one. Next time you run out of shampoo. And so eventually, if you start these are consumables, right? So eventually, you know, the really toxic stuff, I mean, you probably don't want to eat 10 pounds of lead. That statistic just hits me in the back of the head every time. Average woman eats 10 pounds of lead via lipstick in her lifetime. I mean, think about that. That's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And, you know, another point is that I'm 47, so I'm starting to release some of the heavy metals I've been storing in my bones for all these years. Even though I use organic lipstick now, I didn't when I was in my teen years and my 20s and my 30s. So I stored this lead, and now it's getting released as I start to pull up more bone. That happens for all of us after 35. So it's not just your exposures now, it's also your exposures in the past that you can start to have higher levels of.
That's a point that I think we just need to talk about quickly, is that the bones are also the bank account for the place where the body goes, okay, I don't know where to put this. And so the lead will lock in there, you know, mineral based kind of bone. And then as you get into this transition and the body starts using the calcium in the bones, all of a sudden these guys get out of jail. And so the body, again, it's got checks and balances, doesn't know what to do, and it starts freaking out when this stuff is out there. And then all of a sudden we go, yeah, you know, I was fine and now I'm not. Why? And so, you know, as time progresses, we have this thing called aging that brings up different things. Just as a side note quickly, for those of you who have watched David Gottfried in the summit already, you know. For those of you who haven't, go watch his interview. Obviously, I love this couple. They're like a power couple, right? And yeah, it's just a wonderful combination to have, like, arguably the guy has done the most for green in the world to date with what he's done, and the rock star hormone / get your life together doctor living in the same house. So that's definitely a fun house to visit. And yes, I take my shoes off when I go in there.
And then we feed you pastured eggs and sauerkraut. What else did you have for breakfast? I think some goat yogurt.
And some black beans.
Some greens.
Yeah, and some black beans, and we have a wonderful time, and we you know, run to the park and go to the gym and do all sorts of things that you can do and have fun with, instead of, you know, saying going to the bar or going to a restaurant and being mindless about. So, Doc, you and I have so much we can talk about. For those of you who, you know, love this vibe, you know, obviously the Health Bridge on iTunes or Stitcher, you know, all these other places is our radio show, but specifically, where can people find you?
The best place to go is SaraGottfriedMD.com. So I'm Sara H-less SaraGottfried MD.com.
Awesome, and we'll put links to it just to make sure people can find where you're at. And it's wonderful to be able to kind of share this message with you, and it's just your delight to work with. So you guys check her out. She's a fierce warrior, kind of defending us and defending the future of our planet and our children. And so, you know, her message is powerful because it's about you taking ownership and being a stakeholder in your body and then on the planet. So, Sara, love you. Great to see you. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Pedram. Thanks for all you do. Bye, everybody.
Bye.